and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 369, featuring Richard Scott, the CEO and executive producer and one of the founders of Axis Studios over in Scotland. Absolutely love these guys. They're really cool. I didn't realize that, I had actually met Richard Scott almost exactly 4 years ago, I believe it was, when I was at Vertex. I was actually moderating a panel, and he was on the panel. So it was really good to catch up with Richard and do the amazing things they're doing. Kristen, what did you think of Richard?
He has an awesome story. He's been in this industry over 25 years, and 22 of those have been with Axis Studios, his company. I think he said he started it with about 4 animators and artists, all from digital animation backgrounds in Scotland. And he just kind of talks about how it is in Scotland. It's a small community of 5 million people, but he is very active in that, just creating relationships with colleges and art schools, providing mentorship for artists there, which is just great. And he also gives talent a perspective on what it's like to work in like a commercial setting and team environment at Access, just so then they can go out and know what to expect in the world. And he's also just very much into promoting the artists and their talent rather than the software. And you guys go into that a little bit. Yeah, it's just a great podcast. It's a good listen of learning just what it is like this small studio and how the pandemic has kind of affected and not affected it.
Yeah, well, it's not such a small studio anymore. It's a pretty big studio, and they do some incredible work, and really excited about what they're doing, and sort of seeing some of the animations that they've done. They've done a bunch of stuff, including some great work for Love, Death, and Robots, and they're very excited about seeing some of the work that they've done there. Like I said, they're really, really interesting. And he has a great way of giving back to the community, like you said, and sort of talking about that, what that means. And so it's really kind of cool to see that, for sure. So this month of April is a very exciting, special month for us because we are going to be working through this month with our good friends at Exceptional Minds. If you guys remember Exceptional Minds, they were on Total Chaos. They are a school that has been training people in that are in the autism spectrum, training them in terms of visual effects and animations and other things as well. So they are really, really great. And April is Autism Acceptance Month, and we would like to help our good friends at Exceptional Minds by promoting some of their graduates and letting them know that they're available for work and they have done some great work. So this week, who are we featuring this week, Kristen?
We have Mina McCauley. And she will be graduating with an emphasis in VFX. And she also has also amazing motion graphics work as well. And you can check her out on Creatively. Just search Mina McCauley and you can see her work. And we'll put the links in the podcast description as well, so you can see her reels and everything as also.
Perfect. And what we will be doing, as you guys know, we do our podcast both in video and audio form. For the video form, we will be playing her reel right after, just before the podcast starts. So we'll do it right after we finish talking here. So you guys can check out her reel right there on our video feed, and go check her out. And if you'd like to, hire her, you can of course go to Creatively and check it out there and see what she has to do. And there's a link right on our podcast page. But also just make sure, to check out Exceptional Minds. They're a fantastic organization, as we said. Not only do they help people on the spectrum get trained into this field and do all the great work that they do, but they actually also help employees learn about what it's like to employ someone that's on the spectrum and how they can help and be the most effective place there. So exceptionalminds.org is where you can check out, and they are available. You can find them on social and all their website and all kinds of stuff. So please check it out. And we're very excited to feature Mina McCauley for this week. Now, if people want to know more about the podcast, where can they go, Kristen?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Of course, you can always email us with your ideas, labs@chaosgroup.com. We really appreciate all of your feedback there as well. But for now, let's first you will see, if you're listening to the video or watching the video, you will see Mina McCauley's reel. And right after that, we'll be going to episode number 369 with Richard Scott.
Welcome to another CG garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
So, Richard, I think the last time we met, we actually met in person at, what was the event in UK?
Vertex Festival.
Vertex, that's right, Vertex. Yeah. We were both on the panel, right?
We were on a digital humans panel, I believe, or something along those lines anyway. And,
and it was great. It was great chatting with you. And of course, I've actually known several of the people at Axis who were very active at THU for a long time. So it was fun, sort of connecting with you and finding more about that. But I do have a couple of questions. So tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how did it all start for you in terms of, getting into animation and doing the kind of things you did? I mean, obviously you must have had some interest in computer graphics at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it all started, I was kind of classic at high school. I was probably average at most things, but quite good at art, kind of trending into that kind of territory. I think a lot of people in our industry kind of start that way, especially if you're as old as we are, Chris. And, I actually went straight from high school, didn't go to college, and went and worked in a graphic design company. And that was just before the kind of Apple Mac revolution happened, certainly in the UK, or certainly in Scotland anyway. So I got kind of lucky, started off in a junior position there originally, sitting at a drawing desk using Pantone markers and all of that kind of good stuff. And then within kind of 2 years of being there, installed a huge Apple Mac network, and the biggest one in Scotland. And, anyone under the age of about 25 got immediately kind of press ganged into, sitting down at these computers and seeing what they could do. And I fell into that kind of category. So, yeah, I kind of got lucky, I think, from that perspective. that evolved into doing really kind of, well, the early photo retouching really was where I went next. So the company, again, they were a guy, David Brown at the time, was kind of my boss within the business, and he was always looking at what the latest technology was. So he had been instrumental in the Apple Mac network going in. And then the next thing he had his sight set on was a Quantel graphic paint box. Not the video paint box, but the actual graphic paint box for photo retouching. And yeah, so one of those got installed, and then not long after that, they put in an SGI with Wavefront on it.
Yep.
And that was my
wow,
first.
We really did have the same path, man.
Yeah, that was my. Yeah. Well, and
what did you think of Wavefront?
That was my first exposure to computer graphics, and that was a design company, so it wasn't really about creating motion as such at that point. It was more, about visualizing design. So we did a lot of whiskey. We're in Scotland, so it makes sense. We did a lot of whiskey bottle designs, whiskey label designs, and there was kind of building those in 3D and rendering them. And when you think back to all of that, it's kind of crazy to think where we are today. But the Quantel graphic paint box had 2 Winchester drives that had to be in their own room with its own air conditioning, separate away from the high resolution monitor, which was probably the size of an average TV in anyone's living room right now, but it was about 6 feet deep, as I'm sure you remember. I mean, it wasn't like CRT sort of deep. It was way deeper than that, and weighed, it would have killed.
Yeah, and it probably weighed like 350 pounds. Or something.
It would have killed you. It would have killed you if it fallen on top of you. So
right,
and it was kind of interesting phase for me, because that moment was just, again, serendipity, luck, whatever you want to call it, just being at the right point and where things are evolving. So I was still doing a bit of Apple, graphic design work. I was doing some retouching on the paint box. I was doing some 3D on Wavefront. And at the same time, Wavefront used to send you these VHSs of their latest reel for the year or whatever. And that's when you started to see what the stuff that was getting done, mainly in the US, and that kind of evolution from Wavefront becoming Alias Wavefront, and the different short films that were being made. And I remember watching Luxor Junior and all the classic things that people, again, of our age would have come across, and thinking like, wow, like I've got no idea how I could do that, but I like it.
Yeah.
And we started doing some motion stuff, but it was more visualization kind of work. It wasn't filmmaking. And in a way, I think that's the biggest sort of change in my experience. Is you start out in design and visualization, and you end up connected to the entertainment filmmaking business. Is quite a big switch in a way. Certainly there would have been a big switch back then. So that was kind of how I got into it. Yeah, and then I went. The guy who was my boss at the time started a small company. There was only 3 of us in there. We had a Barco system for retouching, and we had a couple of SGIs for like Indigos and stuff like that for 3D. And we kind of carried on from there. And then from there, I decided, although I wasn't a big gamer, I decided video games, that was the place to be. And that was when I kind of took the sort of slightly right turn away from like SGIs and high-end systems like that. Went to a games company. It was all predominantly PC based. I learned Lightwave, and that was the start of getting more into linear narratives rather than visualizations and design, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was when I was at DD, it was there were still a lot of people using the SGIs and all that stuff, but then that was the features people, and then the commercial people were using Wavefront or Lightwave and PCs and
Yeah.
things like that. And it was really a different mentality of like, you know, how those two things exist, because Wavefront was expensive and
Oh, yeah.
SGI was very expensive.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when I think about it now, you know, the 3 SGI workstations they had in that small 3-person company, I mean, that was probably, I don't know, it must have been 60,000, 70,000 pounds worth of equipment, which back then was a lot of money, right?
At least an Indigo used to cost 50,000 on its own, and then early stages of Maya, like the first copy of Maya 1 was like 50 grand for one license.
Didn't know that.
I think I remember specifically, like, people would say that like hiring someone to sit down at a desk is like $200,000 worth of commitments.
I mean, it couldn't be any more different now, could it? I mean, that's
it's way different.
I know when we were using Lightwave DD, what was happening at DD was kind of the pinnacle of what people were doing in Lightwave, along with Foundation, and we were kind of looking at that from the UK, in this games company, going like, how do we do that? How do we achieve that? That was when I kind of realized that there's more to being a CG artist. You know, what Foundation and DD had was those were filmmakers who were using these tools, as opposed to tool users who were trying to be filmmakers. And I think that was a kind of realization point for me that there's still a lot to learn, ultimately, outside of just software and stuff like that.
Did you know someone named Chris Blythe at all?
I have never met Chris. I've spoken to him, but I've never met him in person. But I know he's a Scot, obviously, and very strange. You know, it's funny how the world links up, isn't it? I think his wife provided the voices on some of the Halo work that we did back in like 2012 or something like that.
It could be,
and that was quite an unusual kind of connection that we came across somewhere along the lines. But yeah, I mean, John Allardyce was another name, I think, that was working around then as well. And I met John.
I worked closely with another guy. I worked with another guy named Rory McLeish, who was very Scottish name, but he...
yeah. Again, I don't think I've ever met Rory, but I think, you know, he's another person that we might have spoken to or exchanged emails with, or maybe even met at a SIGGRAPH or something, possibly.
Sure.
But no, it's funny that was a small. When we were using Lightwave, that was the kind of, like I said, it was the kind of beacon. You know, what was happening at DD there was the cutting edge of what you could achieve with Lightwave. Perspective.
Yeah, it's it. I always thought. I mean, I've known Chris for years, and Rory. I haven't seen Rory. He's moved back to Scotland, so I haven't seen him in a long time. But always such creative people. Like some of the most interesting creative ideas, and very diverse. Like Rory was an incredible musician on top of all of that. So there's like very much a creative blood and feeling. And so I've always thought of, you know, my interaction with Scottish artists have always been very encompassing creativity and into story as well. So it was really great to see that. Anyway, so I'm very excited. A little distraction. All right, so back to you. I'm sorry about that. So you're doing stuff in the game companies at this point and using
and it was interesting. The game company again was an independently set up Scottish company. The two guys that set it up were architects, actually. Originally, just another example of, you know, the same day I started, one of the guys who originally founded Axis alongside myself and Stu and Dana started on the same day. He came from an engineering background. Dana had a fine art background. Stu had a design background, and you know, had taught himself Lightwave in his bedroom or his apartment, basically. And it was that games company was a real coming together of people who ultimately didn't know how to make a video game, but they were kind of had all these different skill sets and backgrounds that were quite interesting. So we spent 3 years. I spent 3 years there, and that's where I met Dana, Stu, Graham, and ultimately we went on to set up Axis after that. And we'd spent that 3 years kind of really getting to know what made the game industry tick a bit. But we were still at art, we were at lead artist kind of level, the four of us. And ultimately, that company, the game I went there to work on, never got released. But what it did have is it had these amazing cutscenes that we made. And that was my first kind of real exposure to more, like I said, more of that kind of filmmaking, storytelling element. We boarded it all out. We went through the classic filmmaking process, and I started to learn about cameras and editing and all of these kind of elements that I hadn't really touched on before, and really enjoyed that experience, as well as learning Lightwave. And I'm sure it was probably same at DD time. Everyone. You built your own character, you rigged it, you maybe did the animation, you maybe lit it, you did a lot of, and you maybe did 2 shots or 3 shots, you didn't do a full sequence. It was a kind of, when I think about it now, it was a very sort of unusual way to work. But I think with a team of predominantly sort of generalists, it really, really worked. And I think that was kind of some of the founding of what Axis was about as well, was how do we bring generalists together and try and create in a way where we're all kind of inputting in very similar ways.
What motivates the guys? Like, what's the pinnacle moment where it was 4 of you, right? 4 founders,
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
When the 4 of you sort of got together and said, "All right, let's start a company." Like how do you come to that conclusion, and how do you set that up?
Well, I mean, ultimately the conclusion was reached because the company that we were working for, like I said, they had tried to make games. They had zigzagged across kind of various. They had pivoted a lot. Let's put it that way. And their kind of final pivot was, I mean, again, they were ahead of the curve here ultimately when you think about it. But their final pivot was into what they believed were going to be kind of virtual characters that would, either present news or whatever, and they were driving it with kind of some really basic kind of coding that was going on. They were doing voice synthesis, by typing in a script and then having it digitized and lip syncing to that and all of this sort of stuff. So it was, in a way, it was way ahead. I mean, it didn't work because they were too far ahead of the kind of curve a little bit.
Way far ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a pivot that started to take us away from the filmmaking storytelling aspect that we all wanted to do. And that was the catalyst for us, and not just us, but a number of other people as well, to go, I'm not really sure this is the direction that we're headed. Like, so we actually linked up with another Scottish video game company at the time, and they were developing their own IP. And this was something that we'd always been excited about. And they said, why don't you come and just be a 4-person department inside our company, and let's take the IP that we're developing and create some animated sequences from it, and then we'll take it out into the world and see what happens. So that was ultimately kind of how it started. So it wasn't even a company at that point. It was more a division or a department or a room. It was basically a room within a game developer, to see what would happen. It was an experiment ultimately. And that experiment ended up into us spinning off as a separate company with the Axis name, and eventually, doing a buy-in and owning part of that, and then it all kind of evolved from there. So it was kind of setting up a company by stealth, and not particularly deliberate stealth, but it happened.
Right.
Which is good because you get support, right? Setting up companies is really hard, and knowing how to deal with legal and human resources, and even if you're a small team, you still have those types of things bridges you have to cross. And we luckily had the support of this video game developer to help us do that. So I think that we probably had a smoother entry into setting up a company than a lot of people might have had.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like you basically joined a company that helped you make your own company.
Yeah, and unfortunately for that business, we outlasted them. They no longer exist, and we do.
Right.
So, I every now and again I think about those days, and I think about we wouldn't be where we are today if they hadn't offered us that kind of opportunity. Again, I think they were probably a little bit further ahead. I think if you were exploiting IPs in games, then it was Sonic and it was Street Fighter. It was like huge titles. It wasn't an original IP that had never actually been released as a game yet that you were looking to exploit in other entertainment media. But again, they were probably just a little bit, maybe 5-10 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's the birth of Axis, and that was probably when was that, or what year was that?
That was just it was December 1999.
Oh wow. Okay, so hitting 2000 with a bang. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
I mean, what's the worst that could happen, Chris? It was.
Well, I don't know, but
yeah.
if you're not going to take that risk, do it, right? So yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so you start the 2000s with Axis as your company and going. So, what were some of your goals, and how did you get your customers? Like, what were you trying to do there?
I mean, I think we knew the games industry well. We were supported by a game developer, so that made absolute logical sense. We started, getting on the road a bit and going to E3 and GDC and stuff like that. And I'd personally done a reasonable amount of kind of client facing stuff when I was in the graphic design world. So I was kind of okay with going along to events and trying to meet people, but I had no idea. I'd never been to GDC or E3 or anything like that. I had no idea of the scale of this thing, or you just turn up, there's 65,000 people or whatever it is, and you're just like, I kind of had in my head I was going to hang out in the bar and bump into people, but that I totally misread that as an option. So we worked with the people that game developer knew. We got kind of fed leads and opportunities and contacts and stuff like that. We reached out to the contacts that we'd had previously in the other company as well, and we just started to try and get the ball rolling. We were very focused on the video game industry at that point, and it was all about intro sequences for games, and even really trailers weren't really a thing then. I don't think it was probably it was more about cutscenes or intro sequences. So yeah, and we started working with Infogram and a few other kind of reasonably sized publisher developers. But we were also doing loads of scraps of other stuff that, was all about keeping the lights on, really, and classic kind of stuff. We weren't sitting there, I can tell you now, we weren't sitting there going, in 20 plus years, we're going to be, doing the things we're doing now. I think we've always been fairly opportunistic, I think. And I don't know whether that's got something to do with being in Glasgow, in Scotland, where you're not connected to, you're not really in an entertainment hub where stuff's happening around you, where you can kind of probably be more proactive in a way. I think we were much more opportunistic, like talk to some people, see what happens. Oh, that could work. Let's do that, and it might take us on. And I think that's been that has its pluses and minuses, but I think that's been at the core of Axis's existence for a long time. Is look for opportunities, be clear of the direction, general trajectory we wanted to go in, but not mapping out sort of complex business plans or anything like that, because we'd never run it. That's the other thing, we'd never run a business before, which is
right.
Which is always a challenge, even working out how to do that. So early days, we all wore different hats, and we swapped the stuff that nobody wanted to do around each other, and all of that was going on. But that's every small business, as far as I can tell, no matter whether it's
right.
in the industry or not.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I actually think it's, like I said, I was always been fascinated by you guys being in Glasgow and what that means. And obviously you guys have been very successful. You've been here for over 20 years so, as your studio. But I noticed that, I was looking, doing a little background check to see what I can do. But you do a lot of active things with the Scottish and the art scene and the animation scene. There's a lot of sort of things you are involved with to sort of promote sort of that area. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think animation is, there's no two ways about it. It's a small community in Scotland. for sure. It's a small country. There's only 5 million people in the whole country, so it's going to be a small community. But we've always tried to stay somewhat as active as we can. So at a kind of new entrance level, we have relationships with local colleges and art schools, where we're looking to provide. We provide mentors, or certainly pre-pandemic, we were quite prolific in providing mentorship and bringing people into the studios and buddying them up with people, and all of that kind of stuff in a way to look for that talent and give the talent, more importantly, I suppose, give the talent a perspective of what it's like to work in a commercial setting. I mean,
Right.
I always kind of thought I was lucky that I'd been in some version of a commercial creative setting since I was 18, 19 years old. So I know what that means. I know you have to compromise here and there, and there's deadlines, and there's budgets, and there's all of those kinds of elements. And you have to work as a team. I think that's the other really important thing. And I think in the UK, I think at that point in time, the early days, I think the educational side of animation was a little bit behind what was happening in the US, where I think they had grasped that you need to recreate that team experience that happens in a kind of studio setting. In the UK, it was much more about individuals learning pieces of software or trying to make a short film, the entire short film themselves, all of
Right.
these kinds of things. We wanted to give that kind of exposure as to, well, no, if you come in here, you won't be building the asset, rigging it, animating it, lighting it, doing the editing, doing the music, So we do that. We've certainly been involved in there's a Tom Bryant who runs an animation studio called Interference Pattern in Edinburgh, set up a fantastic event called Move Summit, and that pre-pandemic that had run for 3 years in a row, and it was really building. It's a real shame the pandemic blew a bit of a hole in the whole thing, but it was really building fantastic momentum, getting great speakers coming in from the US, UK, and we sponsored that. We provided speakers. We had our guys doing portfolio reviews. We were doing everything that we could to kind of just support what was going on in Scotland. And Scotland's got a great just rich creative history of storytelling, writing, music. You've got the Edinburgh festivals. There's film festivals going on, and it's really how can we kind of wedge certainly animation, visual effects into that in a way that's more visible. And the other thing I did, I spent 4 years on the board of Creative Scotland, which is a government-run body that looks at all of the arts, from dance to theatre to TV, film, and television. And that was a real eye opener for me as well. Just that whole being involved in an organisation like that, seeing what else was going on creatively across Scotland was incredible. So yeah, we've tried to give as much back as we can.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. I think animation is an art form, especially in storytelling, that's important. And it's really great that, Scotland is recognizing that as an art form as important as dance or music, So,
yeah. And I think there's real momentum starting now, like in spite of being around for 22 years in Glasgow, it probably is in the last 5 to 10 that the momentum started to build, we've had, the Move Summit, for example, had some attendees from Gobelin in Paris, massively revered animation course and school and talent coming off of that course. And they were at the Move Summit because they recognised that Scotland was building a momentum and there was opportunities for their students to be potentially working, once they graduate, to be working in Scotland. And it was great to see that kind of shift happening. And as you said, I think it's too easy to get caught up in, especially when it's computer graphics, for it to be caught up in the technical nature of what's happening and for the art form to be sidelined a little bit. So what was great about the Move Summit was that it mixed all of that beautifully together. That, that's what the best kind of festivals and conferences do, don't they? They mix together the really kind
Yeah.
of mind-blowing technical with the incredibly artistic.
Yeah, too. I'm always a person that I don't think it happens as much as it used to anymore. But it was really sad when people look at a beautiful image or a rendering or an animation and they ask what software was used to create it instead of asking who made this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, what talented artist created this is the question you should be asking, or artists.
The one that really hit home for me, I was working on a movie called Stealth, which is not a great movie, but there was this artist, and she was amazing, and she did this shot of the plane landing on the aircraft carrier, and it looked seamless, perfect, like really beautiful. And someone said, "That looks incredible. What HDR was used for this?" I was like, really?
Yeah.
No, the HDR didn't do that. The artist. Exactly. So yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I'm really excited. And when I was looking into some of the stuff you're doing, I was really excited to find out how much, you're giving back to the community and working with the community to do that. So I think that's a really
I
great
think,
thing.
Unfortunately, COVID and all of that sort of stuff sort of put the brakes on a lot of that in some regards, but I'm not sure what the status is in the US, but I think, for us, certainly in Scotland anyway, I think living with COVID and all of that sort of stuff is the thing. And I really expect to see some of these things bounce back this year. I don't know whether Tom's planning on Move Summit this year, but if he is, we'd love to be there supporting it again, because great to draw attention. And I think the other thing is we've really enjoyed bringing, again, pre-pandemic, I don't want to keep saying that, but we've brought a lot of international people to Scotland as well. I mean, currently, I think I was just doing a review of this the other day. I think we've got 33 different nationalities working for us at the moment, or something insane like that.
Oh, that's amazing.
They're not all in Scotland, but obviously because of what's changed. But even then, I think we were about, maybe 16, 17 different nationalities working out of Scotland. And that's really exciting to bring people to Scotland, for them to experience living in Scotland. A lot of people had never been to Scotland before, didn't really know a lot about Scotland, didn't know about Glasgow. So I think that's exciting as well, because that message goes back out that interesting things are happening. And that's keep momentum going.
Well, how did you guys, or how was you're still ongoing, I guess, to some extent, how have you weathered the COVID situation? What were some of the things that really affected you guys?
Well, I think like everybody, we within a couple of weeks, we'd worked out how to do something we never thought we would be able to do, which was have everyone working remotely. Paul Macman, who's our COO, was ahead of the curve and was ahead of the government decisions that were being made. And worked with Peter Devlin, as our head of IT, to kind of come up with solutions and really start rolling out the infrastructure side of things. And what we set up initially didn't work for everybody, didn't work for everyone in every discipline creatively, and we've adapted that over the kind of 2-year period. Bringing Teradici into the frame rather than some of the other kind of remote working solutions we were using. We were adding Slack so there was easier, more readily communication and all of these kinds of things. And I think the really difficult thing for me anyway, at a sort of personal level, has been sitting in this room for 2 years essentially, and not I like to interact with people. That's my job, number one, and it's
right.
What my personality is most suited to. And I like to, feel the temperature of what's going on, and you can sense, kind of what's happening in the studio, whether there's something exciting happening, whether there's an issue, whether there's, some people that are not as happy as they would like to be. All of those things are kind of more readily sensed when you're together. And it's more likely that someone's going to say to you, have you got 5 minutes so I can just tell you about X or Y? And that's very difficult to recreate in the kind of working from home scenario. And certainly from a personal perspective, it was weird. 2019 for us was a year of quite a lot of growth, and I'd spent a lot of time being quite focused in the business. And I remember in kind of October time saying, right, 2020, this is the year I'm gonna get on the road more. I'm going to go to the US more. I'm going to go to here and here, and then of course the whole thing got blown up. And
Yeah.
but that doing my role is kind of I've found that quite challenging just at a sort of personal level. But we started doing weekly, when we still are doing some form of weekly kind of town hall or screening or behind the scenes sort of stuff. We went through a period of doing a creative showcase where people who work at the company showcased some other creative skill that they had. We've had everything from photography to graffiti art to pottery, and it was what was really good was it wasn't all people in the creative departments as well. So anyone who had a creative hobby was able to kind of showcase what they were doing. It gave everyone a different perspective on their colleagues and the people that they talk to every day. So we were doing all those and still are doing some of those things to kind of create those connections and magnify those connections. But I think that in a way the technology part of it has not necessarily been the hardest bit. I think the hardest bit is communication, morale, creative, idea exchange, all of those kinds of things. Those are the big challenges about everyone working remotely. But the upside was, we got our first feature film project in production in May so a few months into lockdown, and the remote working allowed us to scale up and crew up in a way that we couldn't have. We would have been physically constrained by if we'd had been trying to put everyone inside the four walls of our different studios.
Right.
So that on the one hand it has its challenges, but it's had that advantages of being able to scale using a completely different methodology and technical solutions than putting workstations under desks and chairs at desks ultimately.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the thing that a lot of people are, the location is a benefit, but it's not necessary as it was, right? I could tell I could work at Access if you offered me a job and still be in LA. Right?
Absolutely. And we have people in LA right now. I think we've got people all the way from, Los Angeles to kind of, I think we've got maybe at least one person in Japan, or certainly that far around the other side of the globe, so.
Right.
Yeah. That's an exciting development for visual effects and animation, I think. But there's a whole lot of root finding still to go as to how does that manifest itself over 10 years as opposed to 2 years. What does it mean for creativity? What does it mean for team dynamics? What does it even mean for salaries and wages and costs and all of those kinds of things? Those are all things that have been that are dynamically changing all the time and have been for the last 2 years.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting because obviously, before the pandemic, the incentive that a lot of places would use for where they would do things were based on tax subsidies, right? Mm-hmm. So now you're much more diverse in terms of the way you look for talent at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's really great. Honestly, I'm not that the pandemic was great. It was not great, but, but it definitely sort of changed the way people are going to look. And I definitely think that people are going to realize that the diversity and what people thought were necessary are going to change, Because the first thing I thought when the pandemic happened and everyone had to work from home, I said, I think we're about to break the internet, right? Because like everyone had to work from home. Didn't happen. We managed to make it work. And I think everyone's sort of doing that. But I think this idea of where things are going is really interesting. Time zones are the biggest problem, I think, for me.
Yeah, I mean, our animation supervisor on our feature film, who's wrapped up now, he was working in Australia, and the idea
Right.
was he was going to come to the UK. So we're a few months into the pandemic when we hired him, and he's really excited about coming with his wife and his son to Scotland. Never been there before, and we're like, yeah, in a few months, in a few 6 months maybe,
Right.
you'll be here. And he did the entire movie from Australia, supervising a team of animators who are predominantly not on his time zone,
Yeah.
and working some crazy offset hours to match the kind of middle ground of the time zone. And
Yeah.
he deserves a medal for doing that for the period of time. So that's that there are upsides there, and there are the downsides contained in that one example there. And I think that
Right.
yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Like you said, like the whole tax credits thing, I think is going to be incredibly interesting. Like, how is that? I don't mean how's that going to evolve in the next year or two. I mean, what is that? What is the reality of that over like 5+ years?
Right.
Because it's a sort of underpinning for the whole strategic approach to a lot of studios and a lot of businesses and a lot of filmmakers and film studios as well. How is
Right.
that going to evolve? I mean, we very much, like I think most studios that I'm aware of anyway, are if you want to be in a physical space, then we can make that happen. If you want to work hybrid, we can make that happen. If you want to be completely remote, we can make that happen as well. I think that's certainly in the next 12 to 24 months, that will be the approach that most people will take. I again, at a sort of personal level, I can't believe that won't have some impact on creativity and team dynamic.
Yep.
That won't be that positive. Let's put it that way. It may not be hugely negative, but it might. So it'll be really interesting to see. We're now kind of looking at physical space and going, okay, what is the axis 5 years from now? How much physical space does it need? What does it need physical space for? And what
Right.
Those are all the questions that we're asking ourselves right now, with a view to not this year, but probably next year, starting to pivot a little bit on some of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because 2013 or so was pretty much if you were a visual effects artist working in LA, if you wanted to continue your career, you had to move to Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
Or okay. And so I don't know if that's an obligation anymore.
No, I don't. I don't think it is, and I personally think that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
I think that certainly if you've got a family, you don't want to be dragging them around
Right.
tax incentive part.
Yeah, migrant work is not a good. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So I think that's a positive thing, and I think it's, and I agree with you. Culturally, you get a much broader range of voices and cultural kind of perspectives that you probably wouldn't have got before, which again I think is very positive as well. So
Right.
there's loads of positives in it. There's loads of challenges in it. Who knows what the sweet spot is, Chris? I don't. If I knew the answer to that.
I don't know. I think I'd like to see people more often. Although I got to say, like you've been stuck in that room for 2 years. I've been stuck in my room for 2 years. And when now that I'm actually going out and meeting people in person, I realize I've lost some social skills along the way. So I'm fine with Zooms and things like this, but actually having lunch with someone is a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, but I think I think we've maybe forgotten the value that lies in that. So, going for lunch with someone, because we never really realized it was there in the first place.
Right.
We didn't necessarily. It was subconscious, the value that comes from that the extra nuances and different type of interactivity. I think it's very similar to situation of being able to lean across and ask someone a question in the space of 48 seconds, whereas now you need to at least set up a 15-minute video conference to ask them that question, you know, or you ask them on
Right.
Slack and you don't even get to see their face or their reaction or whatever. So, you know,
Right.
there's real nuance there, but I think it's a really important nuance.
Well, the other thing that we've lost is, you know, was a supervisor, you could walk around and you could see someone's desk and you could say, oh, let me help you with that. And because you can see what they're doing. Now you can't just sort of, you have to wait till that person thinks they're in trouble before they can ask for help.
That's exactly right. And one other thing on top of that, just talking about people coming in, new entrants into the industry, you know, one of the ways that, you know, people coming in at junior levels within I guess any business, but especially ours, the way that they learn is by leaning over, looking at someone's monitor and going, wow, that's cool, and leaning over and going, how did you do that? And then going, oh, let me show you, I did, you know, X, Y, and Z, and it's completely interactive and unplanned and unstructured, and you can't get that if you're a junior person sitting and you've got Houdini open, and like you said, you might be banging your head off the brick wall a little bit, but you keep going until you absolutely can't, you know, take it anymore, and then you ask for support. So I think there's a real, you know, we all know out in the industry right now there's a shortage of talent, right? There's not enough people, so we need those new entrants coming into the industry. But if it's going to take them longer, let's say, to kind of learn and progress, that's going to be a limitation on animation and visual effects in some regard.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that specifically, but it's very, very true. Very true. But let's try to be a little more positive. Let's talk about this big growth. Let's talk about this big growth that you guys are experiencing and all the great work that you're doing. Obviously, you've diversified a whole lot more than doing, you know, cutscenes and intros to video games. So what kind of work are you guys encompassing these days?
Well, predominantly we kind of have two camps. We have short form work, which is predominantly still around the video games industry, some theme park, LBE type work as well. And then we have the long form work, which is predominantly, we have our visual effects team doing TV and film work. We've done some episodic TV work in various different ways. And, you know, we're, as I said, working on an animated feature at the moment. So those, you're right, we've diversified quite heavily. There's a huge difference between making, you know, an amazing piece of CG that lasts 3 minutes to making an 85-minute feature as we're doing at the moment, and, you know, massive amounts of learning across all of those kind of transitions that we've made. And a lot of the times it's not easy to make those transitions, and I think is one of the things that we've always enjoyed as kind of the founders of Axis, I think, was working on a diverse range of different work. So really, in the really early days, we were doing title sequence or promos for the Disney Channel, commercials and game trailers, you know, so you had a whole range of mix of styles. And to us, it was just about, you know, telling a good story, good performances, making the CG look as great as possible, no matter what the piece of content was. I think we've held on to that. You know, we, as you said, we've diversified. We've got quite a diverse range of styles that we work in as well, and that's something that is a, I wouldn't say it's a USP of Axis, but it's certainly a strength of Axis. But it's also a big challenge for us as a studio, especially when you're scaling, is what works for a stylized project that's 3 minutes long might not work as well for a stylized project that's half an hour of content. And, you know, what works for something that's hyper real for a game trailer doesn't work for something, you know, really painterly like the Tall Grass episode of Love, Death and Robots that we did, for example. So one of the challenges I suppose we set for our teams and our artists and our pipeline guys is that we're not always aiming at the same target, and that is hard. And I take my hat off to every single one of them for being able to kind of shift and pivot and be able to adapt like that. because I think if you want to do things really well and you want to do them at volume, then most animation studios start to specialize in a particular look or whatever. Or they only do features, or they only do TV series, or something like that. So yeah, the growth has come from that diversification. It's definitely been challenging and remains a challenge to kind of that. And I think I've always said that if we can get a really nice balance between those longer form projects and the short form projects, we can probably start to narrow our focus a little bit. And yeah, I think over the next few years we'll start doing that.
Okay.
So and by that I mean, we maybe narrow down to really specializing in kind of just the pure hyper-real work being for games clients, and not trying to apply it into long format, for example, and stuff like that. So I think we just got to find our way kind of through some of that, and see where the opportunities come from. But one of the things that I've been trying to do in my role over the last few years is move from being still quite opportunistic to more proactive. Like, this is what we want to do. We're going to go and try and make this happen, as opposed to reacting to. And that's where the feature project kind of came out of, that much more proactive kind of mentality. We really wanted to go down that path. We wanted to be able to experience that level of storytelling endeavor, essentially, and we really wanted to be able to challenge our teams creatively, and see where that took us, and features seemed like a really good option for that. And I think, as again, a sort of luck scenario is that in the last 7-8 years, features have gone from being $80 to $200 million things that are made in California somewhere to being much more made on lower budgets, with different types of stories, and that kind of feature world has become more accessible to studios that are not DreamWorks and Pixar and Illumination, and that's an exciting time as well.
Do you think that obviously you mentioned Love, Death and Robots as one of the projects you worked on, but that type of content, and I've actually had long talks with Tim Miller about this, because he wanted to make something like that for years and years and years, and it wasn't until sort of the streaming revolution that people are like, oh, people want specific things that they would not be done in the past. Yes. Right? And so do you think that that's going to sort of change the way you guys think? There's more accessibility to things?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, Chris, I think we're banking on that, in some regard. We've it's been great to be, we've done 2 episodes of Love, Death and Robots. We're doing a 3rd at the moment. It's been fantastic to be involved in that and see it get the reception, because like Tim has always believed that it would get the reception and the audience would be there for it. We always believed that as well. Tim made it happen, and we were delighted, along with loads of other studios, to be part of that and to see that it worked, essentially. And I think we've, the streaming revolution has ultimately changed that. I've always sort of said, since we started to see that shift in the streaming, when I'm talking to people who don't really understand that in animation there isn't really that kind of older skewing content, or there hasn't historically been that older skewing content, the way I always describe it to them is that if you take, you would traditionally have referred to that as niche content that would have only been for a small audience. But when you add all the niches up together around the world, and you can distribute to them in one go, then that niche becomes a really big audience, or those niches become a big audience. That's the thing that I think has shifted the dial and will continue to shift the dial. So I'm excited. You look what the streamers are doing with with anime. You look what Arcane has done recently. Incredible work by Fortiche and Riot Games. They're clients of ours, and we work with them on a really regular basis. And what they did there was incredible. So yeah, I always call it, I always share this stuff around my friends and on social media and stuff like that. And I always put hashtag animation revolution, because I think there is a bit of a revolution going on. And and it's, people are engaging with that. And, I'm looking at my son, he's just turned 18. That's the kind of stuff he wants to watch, right? Like, he wants to watch Love and Death and Robots, because it's edgy, it's short, all of that sort of stuff. He wants to watch Arcane because it's, it's beautiful to look at, and it's great storytelling, great performances.
Right.
He watches a lot of anime. And I think and that's not driven by me.
Right.
My daughter can take it or leave it, so it's not. I'm not spoon feeding them that stuff. They're finding that themselves, and that's I think that will make a difference. And we've relatively recent, the last few years, we've been developing our own projects and getting on board co-productions and IP that's being developed, and we've optioned a couple of existing like graphic novels and things like that. And we've always had when we've been looking at that slate of projects, we've always had a foot in two different camps. So one is, yes, we know that we can't just make edgy, older skewing animation, and that some of our projects need to be in a more, let's say, family co-viewing kind of space. But we want them to have an edge. There's no reason they can't be co-viewing family and still have an edge, and be a bit different. And then some of the other projects that we've been developing are squarely, more in that older skewing kind of more niche kind of area. There's no doubt that the appetite and the traction for the older skewing stuff is smaller than the family co-viewing projects. That there is no doubt about that. But I think there's momentum growing, and every time an Arcane comes out, or a new season of Love, Death and Robots, or The Witcher animated film that came out recently, and these things just kind of slowly are building on top of each other to, I think, creating.
Well, I've been waiting for this for so long. I mean, I don't know if you guys had it in Scotland, but back in the 90s, there was MTV had Liquid Television, where they did these and that was, when you saw things like Eon Flux and things like that, and you're like, when am I going to see more of that?
It's a long time coming, though, right?
Yeah, it is, right? So think about and so I think that's something that was very important and very cool. And like you said, it's not necessarily that it hasn't existed, and it has existed in forms of anime and things of that nature. It's just that there was a stigma by, specifically the Hollywood studios that were like, if it's animated, it is Pixar or Disney.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with Pixar and Disney. It's just that there is other flavors that are possible.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if you're in the animation world, and you've spent time at animation festivals and that sort of stuff, you'll have seen many short films that are, across a range of different kind of niches of storytelling and styles and all of that sort of stuff. So if you're in the industry, it's not just, for kids and families. But if you're not in the industry, that's your main exposure. Even growing up from a kid yourself, it would have been Saturday morning TV. It would have been, that's what it would have been. And I think, I'm excited for the continued momentum, I think, that is going to build there. And like I said, we're hoping to be, as Tim Miller and Blur and many other people are, we're hoping to be there at the right time.
Yeah. Well, that's very, very exciting. I'm very excited about the work you're doing. And it's gorgeous work. So I really appreciate talking to you about it. So tell us real quick, because we're kind of low on time, but how big is Axis right now? Like, I know you guys have an office in Glasgow and in Bristol too, right?
So in Bristol, yeah. So, in terms of headcount at the moment, but none of which are in either of those two offices really. I think we're over 400 people.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of growth and a lot of learning about how to go. I mean, if you think about it, we were 4 people 22 years ago, and now we're 400 people. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said at the start, we never really set out, going in 10 years' time, we're going to be 400 people because that's what it's going to take to do what we're going to do. So, I think as someone trying to keep the culture of Access alive and trying to grow the business and make it work and make it an experience that people enjoy, that's been a big challenge.
Yeah.
Having that going alongside growth. And when I talk to anyone who's got 1,000 people or more people, I think well done. That's an amazing, it's an amazing feat to be able to create a business of that kind of scale and make it work. So it's been. I mean, I think this year we're not planning any additional kind of growth in headcount or any of that sort of stuff for 2022. I think we need to deliver a feature film. We need to. There's lots of things that we've learned that we need to start ironing the kinks out on along that way around, like the experience and the pipeline and all the usual stuff that studios grapple with, no matter what size they are.
Right. Right. Well, that's very exciting. And we're just around about an hour, which is perfect. I'm very excited to see where you guys are going. We'll put links to access this site on our, every podcast has its own page. We'll put links up there as well. You guys got a fantastic reel, and actually many reels of the diversity of your work. So it looks really, really great. And it's awesome seeing you again. Hopefully next time we'll do it in person. We'll be at something like Vertex or something like that. But it would be great to see.
I'll happily come to California, Chris. It's not a problem. I'll be there.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, thanks a lot, Richard.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Great to speak to you. Take care.